The mythical 4-cable method. Let's talk about it a bit. Let's find out what it is, how to use it, and if it's actually the right option for you. The 4-cable method is a way of interconnecting your multifx and your amplifier in such a way that you can select some effects from your multifx unit to come before the preamp and some effects to come after the preamp before the power amp. The only prerequisites for using this, other than having the 4 cables, is both units, multifx and amp, have to have serial effects loop. Both of them have to be on. To use the 4-cable method, you connect cable number 1 from your guitar to your multifx unit input. Cable number 2 from your multifx unit loop send to your amplifier's input. Cable number 3 from your amplifier's loop send to your multifx unit loop return. And cable number 4 from your multi-effects unit out to your amp effects loop return. If you scroll down, you will find a link to a downloadable version of the diagram that you've just seen in my Ko-fi page. It's free to download, but while I have your attention, please click like, click subscribe, hit the notification bell. But how does it all work? Well, first you connect everything as you've just seen. Secondly, you program your multi-effects in such a way that you pick the effects that you don't want to be affected by your preamp of your amplifier. You put them before the loop send. You obviously need to pick the loop send and return points. And you pick the effects that you don't want to be affected by your preamp after the return point. Is that all? Yeah. And no. I've got Marshall Origin 20, all-tube amplifier, 3 12AX7s in the preamp, 2 EL34s in the power amp section. I've got my TC Electronic Plethora X5, because of course, and it's running in 4-cable method, as you've just seen in the video. And I'm running my Marshall Origin straight into a Torpedo Captor 8, which is hiding here next to my leg, so I can easily move the volume if I need to for the recording. And I've got the TC Electronics set with a hypergravity compressor in slot number 1. It's running my mid-boost tone print. You can find it up there somewhere. Then I have the preamp of the Marshall between slot 2 and 3, as you can see by the 2 little jacks there. And then on slots 4 and 5, so after the preamp, I've got a flashback delay and a Hall of Fame reverb. The settings for the delay are, as you can see on screen, 400 and something milliseconds, 36% feedback, and minus 10 dB level. And the settings for the reverb, close to 3 seconds on a plate tone print, close to 3 seconds, tone at 0, so 12 o'clock, and minus 10 dB on the effects level. The hypergravity is pushing around 10 dB on the mid frequencies and tilted all the way to the high end. So this tone print doesn't come standard with a Plethora. If you want to get it, you need to go and watch my other video. I am not going to touch the settings throughout this whole demonstration, so everything you hear is going to be these 3 tone prints. Anywho, let's start. Oh, my vintage V100 THB. You've seen it before. It's got the Seymour Duncan 59s. If you want to see the history of this guitar, links are also somewhere, either there or there. So I'm going to start with dialing in a relatively clean sound on the Origin. So I'm gonna have both gain and master at 5, and this is how it sounds like on my neck pickup. Bridge pickup. Middle pickup, if I can get it. So this is as clean as I would run this amp for any normal application with the vintage, with the LP type guitar. If I pick harder on the bridge pickup, it breaks up as it should. I'm now going to bring in my reverb, back to the neck pickup and playing with medium strength. So you can hear it, it's present, it's there, it's pretty. Bringing in my delay. It's a digital delay, 2290, clean, no modulation, just a straight delay. This is what happens when the amp is clean, okay? I'm running both guitar volumes on full, on middle, neck pickup, whatever. Now I'm going to start cranking the amp. I'm going to keep the master at 5 for now, and I'm going to crank the gain to 3 PM, which is something like 8. I've only touched the preamp, and yet my effects are a lot more compressed. I would say overdriven. What's happening here, right? I'm going to push it with the hypergravity compressor on the mid boost. For comparison, I'm going to knock down the volume on the guitar. Okay, back to full volume. I'm just pushing the preamp, and yet my effects are a lot more forward. Just for kicks, I'm going to goose the power amp, and you can hear it now starting to hiss because it's a tube amp being pushed. Okay, it's all gone to mush. But why? To understand why it happens, we need to learn a bit more about amps. We need to see how they work. So here's a schematic of a simple amplifier as a black box. Your guitar signal goes in one end, comes out the other end. If we now open the box and look inside, we see two major sections. We see the preamp and we see the power amp. The preamp is the bit that shapes your tone, i.e. with EQ, bass, middle, treble, and it gives it the distortion or not that you want or not. That's usually where it happens. And the power section is the bit that takes the signal from the preamp and makes it louder to go to the speakers, which put it out. Simple. So far, our basic amp doesn't have an effects loop, it's just preamp and power section, but we do want an effects loop, right? We are dealing with one, so here's where it goes. It goes between the preamp and the power section. It has to, because otherwise it won't get amplified, i.e. made louder by the power section. Okay, but all's well and good, right? If your character of your tone comes from the preamp and that's before your effects loop, then everything's all right, yeah? Yeah. And no. Let's dig in a bit further. On a tube amp, you see the same basic sections that you had before. So you have a preamp, and you have your power amp, and your effects loop somewhere in the middle. But now you have another section here, which is the phase inverter. Phase inverter is the bit that will prepare the sound that comes from your preamp effects loop to then be fed into the power tubes. Every tube amp needs to have one. They might be valves, they might be tubes, they might be transistors, but it has to be there. The thing is, in some amps, yeah Marshall, I'm looking at you, To get their characteristic sound, you need to overdrive this section. You need to overdrive the phase inverter and the power tubes. Otherwise, you don't get their characteristic sound. And what happens there is when you overdrive this stage, it's exactly the same thing that happens if you feed a reverb or a delay or any other effect into the preamp of your amplifier. i.e., all of the signal gets distorted, which is why everything turns to mush.
So I'm already very close to the limits of the scope of where I want this video to be. I don't want to go into the whole power valve, power tube argument, 6L6s versus EL34s and all of that stuff. That's another video. But the truth is, if you want your classic Marshall to sound like a Marshall, you will need to overdrive the power section.
For comparison, here's a solid-state basic diagram. Same basic blocks, preamp with gain, tone stack, more gain, same effects loop, and the power section. The difference being, on a solid-state amplifier, you do not have a phase inverter. It doesn't need one. There are transistors that operate both ways, so you don't need the phase inverter. Oh, I really don't want to go into this. And you are not supposed to overdrive the power section, because it'll sound like crap. And finally, the modeling amp diagram. Modeling amps are different beasts, because they try to emulate something that happens in the analog realm in the digital realm. So your guitar signal gets into the amp, gets converted into digital, and then everything happens inside a CPU, except for two things. Your effects loop, because obviously it's a physical thing, it has to get in and out. So that is dealt with converters and analog signal paths and blah. And the power amp, because your speakers still don't speak digital, so you still need converter. And on that note, most, if not all, modeling amplifiers come with Class D power amps. Even though the modeling bit is digital, Class D does not stand for digital. It's still an analog power section. Go look it up if you're curious about that. But the main thing about a Class D power amp is you really don't want to overdrive that, because that will sound like shit.
Now the caveat, not all effects loops are created equal. I also don't want to go into that today with the whole tube-driven or transistor-driven or not even driven passive loops. I don't want to go into that. Today I'm mostly concerned about where they sit on your signal chain, what comes after them, and how clean, how much headroom it has. That said, if your effects loop usually sounds like shit, keep watching.
So in essence, amplifiers with a high headroom power section, such as we've just seen, modeling amps or solid-state amplifiers, or within tube amps, stuff like Fender Blackface, high watts, or the high gain monsters such as the Engels and Diesels, all of them will keep your effects loop clean, because you are not supposed to distort the power amp on those amps. And I know that the high gain monsters kind of feel like a bit of a, should it happen that way because there's so much gain in the amp? Yeah, that's the thing. They have really massive power amps, most of them 120, 150 watts, precisely because they need to handle really huge amounts of low frequency energy and really tight chug sound in a way that doesn't overdrive the power section. Representing the high headroom power section amplifiers, we've got a Boss Katana 112. It's Mark 1 100 watt combo. I'm not micing it, I'm not running it direct out, I'm running it just like I did with the Origin. I'm taking the speaker output and coming into the Torpedo Captor. No, it doesn't have a speaker output, but the cable... So I'm running this in the same 4-cable method as I did with the Origin. I have not touched any of the settings on the Plethora, I've just turned the effects on and off. So let's see what happens when I dial in a clean sound. I'm not going for the bestest clean ever, I'm just going for a clean sound that will show you what the effects will do. So clean sound. I'm running, sorry, one last note. Just like I did with the Marshall, I'm running it through the Torpedo, and impulse response is going straight into my recording interface. The impulse response is a greenback 4x12 by Celestion. I said V30 earlier, it was wrong, it's a greenback. If I didn't say V30, ignore me, it's still a greenback. That's the clean sound. Dry, so now with delay and reverb. One of these days I need to learn how to play the guitar. Anyway, you can hear it. It's very similar to what we had with the Marshall clean sound when it comes to the effects. It doesn't matter how much signal you throw at it. The effects always sit behind your main sound in the same proportion that you dialed in the first place. I'm going to now select the crunch channel, because this is a multi-channel amp, whereas the origin you just goose the gain. With this one you can actually select the channels. I'm going to turn off both delay and reverb, see where we stand with this. Again, I'm not looking for the bestest crunch tone ever, it's just something to show what's going on. It's a crunch tone. Now with delay and reverb. Again, the effects aren't being pushed by the power amp, they're not being compressed, they're not being anything, they just sit behind your sound. The effects are respecting the dynamics of my playing. I can play with the volume knob, I can pick softer or harder, and the effects will always stay behind the sound. Let me push this with the compressor, see where it goes. Finally, I'm going to push this into the brown channel, because why not? Let's go for a really high gain preamp style while keeping our power amp clean, because it's a class D, you don't want to overdrive it. So let's see what happens here. Obligatory lick, everybody has to play it. It's really tight, really heavy. Let's bring in delay and reverb. As you can hear, the effects stay behind. Let's bring the compressor in. This is now pushing huge amounts of gain. And as you can hear, even with that huge amount of gain, the effects are still at the back. They're not tripping over each other. They're not tripping over the notes that you're trying to play. I'm actually just going to show you very quickly what happens if I now put my delay in front of my preamp. So I can do that easily with a plethora. Begin to board. I need to go to my effects loop insert. And I'm going to put my insert, i.e. my preamp, between my delay and my reverb. Just so you see what happens. You can see the little jacks there. So you now have guitar, compressor. Okay, I'll turn it on. Going into the delay, going into the Katana, and then coming out, going into the reverb. And back into the Katana. And as you can see, I did not touch my delay settings, I just changed the place. This is kind of what was happening with the Marshall when we goosed it. The power amp was overdriving the delay, which meant that every note was tripping over each other. And again, there's a time and place for this type of stuff, if you like it, if you want to use it. Neil Young made a career out of this type of stuff. Obviously not playing this type of music. But yeah, it's an option. You can use it. In a nutshell, if your effects loop is after all of the distorting bits of your amp, if it comes before a high headroom power amp, piss off, go play your guitar, you're good to go. In the same way, if you want to cook your tubes and you're happy with your effects loop coming before a really distorting power amp, if you like that type of compression and distortion affecting all of your time-based effects, and you want to actually use it as an integral part of your sound, yeah, do it. More power to you. It's a really cool sound. It's a cool effect that has its uses, so off you go. Okay, but what if you still want your power amp tubes to be cooking, but you would like those clear effects? Well, in that case, you take a page from the studio engineer's handbook and you put all of your time-based effects that you want to have that pristine quality after the whole of your amp, not just between the preamp and the power section. You put it at the end. In the studio, you would do that by miking up a cabinet and then taking that sound into the effects processors. You can do that at home if you want, but if you want to take this on the road, or if you can't be arsed with high volume levels that come with miking a cabinet, then you can use a reactive load box after your amplifier. There are plenty right now by such people as Universal Audio. They have the aux box. You've got the TwoNotes Torpedo Captor and Captor X, amazing boxes. You've got Boss with the Waza tube amp expander, and you even have some amps that now have that built in, the reactive load built in. At the time of filming, I can think of Rev D20, G20 Generator Mark III, just came out last month. Sir also have the Pete Thorne model, the PT15. It's got reactive load impulse responses built in, so all of that is taken care of for you. Now, other than the Captor, I don't own any of those, but if you would like to see me do a review and a deep dive of any or all of those, best thing you can do is share this video. Maybe it will reach the people in those brands and maybe they will send me some for review. Oh, but can I still call it the 4-cable method? Yeah, ish. So in the 4-ish cable method, you plug things this way. Cable number 1 goes from guitar to multi-effects. Cable number 2 goes from your multi-effects loop send to your amplifier's input. And now cable number 3, which has to be a speaker cable, goes from your amplifier's speaker output to your reactive load box input. Cable number 4 comes from the output of your reactive load box into your multi-effects loop return, and cable number 5 goes wherever you want it to go. Do you want to still use your existing guitar cab? You just need to find yourself a little power amp, a small power amp that can fit on your pedal board, or you can put it on top of your cab. Class D. They're relatively inexpensive and small. They're highly efficient. So you just take line out from your reactive load into your little power amp, into your speaker, and you're off to the races, with the added advantage that now you can actually have your amp cooking and just on the verge of blowing up at bedroom levels. If you want a really versatile rig that you can plug pretty much anything into, you can still use, again, your reactive load. You put an IR loader after your reactive load, and you plug everything into an FR cabinet, or two if you want a stereo rig. FR stands for flat response full range, or full range flat response speakers, which are in essence PA speakers or studio monitors or something. And again, you can have your amp giving you all of the character to your sound, and you can use them at whatever volume you need, either bedroom volume or stage volume. Or if, like me, you're in the studio, you can simply plug the output of this into your recording interface or your handheld recorder, whatever you use in your studio. So I've plugged everything now in the 4-ish cable method, and I'm running the outputs of my Plethora X5 into my recording interface. So this is how it sounds. I'm going to start by dialing the similar clean tone, barely broken. This is the dry sound, it's the same as you heard before, and now I'm going to bring in my delay and my reverb. Same as previously, or very similar. But now I'm going to start pushing my preamp, so I'm going to bring the gain up to 3 p.m. And as you can hear, instead of the effects coming up with the distortion, they still stay in the back. I'm going to push the preamp with the hypergravity. And my effect level doesn't change, it's still at the back, so I can do whatever with the guitar. And the effects are still at the back. Okay, let me just say this. Out of all of the projects I mentioned earlier that are already studio ready, such as the Rev amplifiers and the Torpedo, the aux box, the Boss tube amp expander is the one that has the greatest feature set, and it might be the one that you want to look into if you want to expand all of your possibilities, because not only does it have a reactive load, it also has impulse response loading, and it has its own integrated effects loop in the unit itself, and a Class D power amp. So everything that I've said about in the options, every option that I mentioned about using it with a cap, using it with FR speakers, or plugging it straight into a recording device, that might be the one that you want to be looking into. It's really expensive, which is why I don't have one, but it's highly versatile and a very interesting product. I hope this video sheds some light on the 4-cable method and shows you if it's something that is appropriate for what you want to do, or if you need to think a bit outside of the box. Let me know in the comments if this is something that you use, if you had to adapt it to your particular rig, and if you're struggling with your rig, and I know that some of you are because of the 4-cable method intricacies, I am available for consultations online, so just hit me up either on Twitter or send me an email and we can book a time slot for you and I can help you with your rig. As I said, the diagrams that you've seen in this video with all of the connections are available to download for free on my Ko-fi page, so just look for the link below. And while you're there, if you want to show me your support for this channel, buy me a coffee there. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, go make some noise.